right, this time on our Lunch and Learn, we're going to learn about the ABS BPPP Guides to Initial Pilot Checkout. And interestingly, the origin of these is such that they became somewhat redundant for a while, but now where we've gone with BPPP, it's actually becoming much more an important document that I need to update. This is one of the first projects that I put together for ABS Air Safety Foundation back starting at about 2016. I had some input from some of the BPPP instructors, but at that time, the pilot training product that we delivered consisted of 9 or sometimes 10 BPPP live weekends throughout the country. And at each one of these weekends was a 4-day event consisting of ground school and flight instruction. And this was the only opportunity our members had to take flight instruction that was created by or delivered by the American Bonanza Society. And so it had some limitations. Again, 9 or so locations each year. It was a Thursday through Sunday event, so participants had travel time, travel expenses associated with it, in addition to the flight training cost. And the times and locations were of our choosing. Members didn't get to say, I want to do my flight training where or when. We told them when we were going to offer it, and they had to come. The flight training time allotted to an individual pilot in the BPPP program was a 4-hour instructional block, and that included briefings, pre-flight inspections, post-flight briefings, and consequently, pilots would get maybe 2.5 hours of flight instruction in the BPPP program, and it was variable based on how far ahead they had to fly from our location to practice areas to other airports for takeoffs and landings, what the weather was doing. So it was fairly limited. In other words, the BPPP system as it existed at the time provided time for a quick review for pilots who knew their airplanes fairly well, but it was in no way a way for somebody to take transition or initial training into the airplane. We just simply didn't have time to do it. And so the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout, I proposed and created this so that we would provide guidance to flight instructors and members to create their own transition training programs that would cover the basics, the most essential information, and were meant to be something of a lead-in to going to a live BPPP weekend event. In other words, you bought this airplane, you go through this with your flight instructor, this program that you can design together with your flight instructor, and then afterward, next time we're in your neighborhood for a BPPP event, go to that. That was the intent of the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout. So specifically to serve AVS members when we could not meet their schedule. It was designed for pilots and their personal instructors to design a program specific to that pilot's needs, following our recommendations. And it was the first product that the American Bonanza Society had that would address the needs of someone who had just purchased a Bonanza, Baron, Debonair, or Travel Air. And we introduced this finally in 2009. All right, so what we have are a series of Guides to Initial Pilot Checkout documents that are available on the website, and they were meant to be a complement to the live training done with our then standardized BPPP instructors. Now, if you look at the Guides to Initial Pilot Checkout, and I'll show you where all these are on the website later on. If you look at the Guides to Initial Pilot Checkout, you'll see that they are broken down by types or models of airplanes. And interestingly enough, this was the first time that I ever grouped together various models of airplanes into these sub-variants, and you'll see those things reflected in the online courses that we present today. But each one of these has their own individual PDF on the website. So if you go to the website, under training, pilot training, over here on the left in the column, you have the guides to initial pilot checkout, and there they are. Click on one, and you get a PDF document that looks something like this. It gives all the folks recognition that helped produce it, and then it goes to the table of contents. And we're going to look at what each of these items are in the guide to initial pilot checkout, remembering that this is reflected in each one of those model variant documents. Now, the first part, using this guide, has some background, how it's supposed to be used and what it's really meant to do. Specifically, we encourage pilots to receive a checkout with somebody who really knows their model of each Bonanza or Debonair. Since this is a Bonanza Debonair document, it says Baron and Traveler and the other ones. However, we also have a lot of resources available for them and their flight instructors if they were not able to work with one of our accredited instructors. I also mentioned in an update the ABS Flight Instructor Academy. I'm going to roll that back around in a bit. These documents all preceded the ABS Flight Instructor Academy by about 5 years. All right. Specifically, it mentions that occasionally a pilot new to flying beach airplanes or transitioning from one model to another does not have the opportunity to fly with somebody who really knows these types of airplanes. My example was always somebody who buys one out in eastern Montana. There just wasn't anybody we knew in that general area who really knew the airplanes. So this is really intended for experienced flight instructors who might not otherwise know the beach products to get together with the student and, following this guidance, put together a personalized transition training plan. All right, the outline's not intended for as a substitute for a thorough checkout. There's some, disclaimer language in there. And it drives the pilot and their instructor into the documentation, primarily the pilot's operating handbook, to find the information we think is important to them when they're first learning to fly this airplane. As you'll see in a moment, the document doesn't tell you everything. It tells you, you need to look at this in the pilot's operating handbook. You should look at this in the pilot's operating handbook. So it's driving them into the documentation. Now, I like that approach also because very frequently flight instructors and airplane owners don't really thoroughly review the pilot's operating handbook, and that's part of the intent of this program as well, to let them know the information is out there if they need it and how and where to find it. All right, so we looked at using this guide. Next up, the next thing in the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout is a systems review checklist. And this is simply things that we think the pilot and their instructor should look at. For example, limitations and all of these different types of limitations that they should look at. And it tells them basically, go look at the limitations section in your pilot's operating handbook and make sure you know all of these things. Those are the things we think are important to you. Emergency procedures, normal procedures, performance. These are just, we want you to look at all of these things, and these are specific things to highlight as you review your pilot's operating handbook together with your flight instructor. It also can help the flight instructor prepare for the training beforehand by knowing what we think they should present. All right, so this goes on for several pages. We have documentation of all sorts of things, and eventually we end up with 18 different areas that we suggest they review as part of this first part of systems review from the guide. All right, so we covered that. Next up, we give them a sample test that the instructor can provide to the pilot to see if they've actually got the information we think is important to them. We don't give them multiple choice answers, but we gave a bunch of questions. And this could be done with an instructor and a student as a written test and followed up by reviewing it together, or it could be done as an oral examination. It also helps the flight instructor beforehand to know what sort of things he or she should know before they give this training. So it has this sample test. All right, we covered that then. Then we have some recommendations for pre-flight check and briefing. It's a fairly short one, but items that we think that they need to review. And there are things in like, well, can I do flight instruction in single flight control airplanes? We need the instructor to know that. We need the owner of the airplane to know that sort of thing ahead of time. Just checking things like insurance policies, everything an instructor should need to do, and anything an airplane owner should be aware of before you go do flight instruction. So that's in there. Next, we have an aircraft pre-flight checklist, and we just talk about things to, make sure you have the right documentation, the airplane's is maintained in accordance with all the airworthiness directives, and actually doing a pre-flight inspection. So it doesn't tell them how to do a pre-flight inspection other than follow the procedures from the pilot's operating handbook. But this is just another checklist, if you will, for both the instructor and the student to follow to make this transition when the pilot's new to the airplane and when the instructor may not be thoroughly familiar with flying a Beach product. All right, next up, flight training general recommendations. The general recommendations are all of those little safety things that we present in the Air Safety Foundation. Don't do touch and go landings, don't retract flaps during the landing rollout so the gear doesn't accidentally come up. Know the weight and balance characteristics of the airplane, plan on having a minimum amount of fuel on board. All of these basic safety recommendations that we present in the BPPP system. Down at the bottom, a checkout following the checklist in this guide covers only the basic information we think most essential to learning to fly this airplane, and we recommend, of course, that they follow it up with flight with a more knowledgeable instructor later on. So again, the intent of this document was to allow transition training to occur and also to drive them into using more of ABS Air Safety Foundation resources later to become even more proficient in their airplane. All right, here's the one you probably get questions about a lot, the by the numbers, those power, attitude, and configuration charts. And I'll show you where you'll find those on the website here shortly, and I've updated that for you momentarily. But in each one of these documents, we have a series of recommended power settings, attitudes, how far up, how far down, left, right, whatever, and configurations, gear up, gear down, trim positions, those sorts of things, to achieve each one of these flight conditions. If I want to fly an instrument approach in level flight, this is what I do with my manifold pressure, my propeller speed, my attitude, my gear, my flaps, whatever, to get the performance that I want. So we do get a lot of questions about the pack charts or the by the numbers charts for flying the airplanes, and these are contained within the Guides to Initial Pilot Checkout. And I put them on the website here also. You'll see them in a moment. All right, so it's all there. If you look under pilot training, I put the by the numbers chart on the bottom of the pilot training page. And if you look at flight instructor resources, I've linked all the pack charts on the flight instructor resources page as well. So you don't have to dig to page 17 of the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout anymore to get it. You can link them off the pilot training page and the flight instructor resources page. All right, lastly, the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout suggests a flight training syllabus. Now, the syllabus may take several flights to fully accomplish. The syllabus may be done over a series of days, and of course it's going to be tailored to the experience and the desires of the pilot receiving instruction. So the whole idea here is let's give a basic outline of what we think is important to occur in the transition period in an airplane and allow the pilot and instructor to design something to meet all those areas. Very frequently, when someone is brand new to an ABS type airplane, especially if they're new to retractable gear airplanes or new to multi-engine airplanes, their insurance is going to require that they get some amount of dual flight instruction in that airplane. It's not unusual at all for someone brand new to retractable gear airplanes to be required to get 15 or as much as 25 hours of dual flight instruction before their coverage permits them to fly solo in the airplane. The FAA requirements are much lower, but the insurance company is betting a lot of money on it, and they have higher requirements. So a flight instructor can use these recommended syllabus items to design a longer or shorter instructional period based on the pilot's needs. All right, a couple other items we put on here. We request or we suggest that at a minimum everything that we put on this suggested syllabus be accomplished sometime during the transition period. All right, and then the instructor should, at the end of any training event, the instructor should always suggest topics for further practice and further study to the student. I like to do that when I do a debrief from any flight training session. Okay, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this. These are the things I think you should practice between now and your next flight review so that you're even better next time. And I like to reflect that philosophy in the products that we have for Air Safety Foundation as well. All right, so the flight training syllabus just has a number of different things that you do, you know, takeoff and climb, different types of takeoffs, short fields, soft fields. All these different techniques are suggested on the syllabus. And again, it doesn't tell you specifically do these things or do them in this order, but sometime during your training you should do at least these 17 different topic areas to get what we consider to be a minimum standard of safety flying one of these types of airplanes. All right, so we've covered everything that's in the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout. Now, on the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout page, there are some items down at the bottom called supporting documents. And the supporting documents are links to a number of other documents on the website. Many of them are articles that have appeared in ABS Magazine about some of the things that are covered in the flight training syllabus. So there are a bunch of things on there, and I could probably update that quite a bit at some point, but there are some additional documents on there as well. All right, so does any of this sound familiar? Bear in mind, this is the 2006 to 2009 period when I put this together. All right, a lot of what started as the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout ended up being part of the online ABS Flight Instructor Academy, which came about 5 years later. A lot of those safety protocols, a lot of the syllabus items, the specific guidance for things that we suggest for initial flight training, those are all now part of the Flight Instructor Academy. A lot of the safety protocols that were originally designed into the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout ended up being some of these little cards that we hand out at the Flight Instructor Academy events that provide the safety protocols that we suggest flight instructors follow and some techniques for the flight instructor to follow when actually providing flight instruction in the airplane. The overall philosophy of the Guide to Initial Pilot Checkout was to provide the minimum things that we think are essential to learning to fly your airplane. The Beachcraft Essential Systems and Techniques course was a direct development of the Guides to Initial Pilot Checkout. So in a certain way, the Guides to Initial Pilot Checkout became redundant or maybe even superfluous once we had the online training program available, because we had the information in a much more expanded way available to members on the website. And then at the time, we had the flight portion of BPPP where they would then fly with one of our accredited instructors to finish the program. And so frankly, I didn't put a lot of effort into updating the guides to initial pilot checkout because what I really needed to do was develop more of the online courses, and that was the primary way to do things. Since last July, we no longer do the flight training portion. We do have the ABS recognized flight instructors, but since last July, we weren't doing that. So now it really becomes more important again to have guidance for an individual member and their individual flight instructor to develop a course of transition training for their airplane and also for recurrent training. So we've got all of these. I still have some to do. I never did the Travel Air or the 56 TCs. But my longer range goals now are to rewrite these each as the ABS transition training guides and fully integrate these into both the BEST and the Flight Instructor Academy courses. In other words, part of the written guide will be, hey, take the online BEST course and do all this sort of stuff, and then design your syllabus with your flight instructor. In the Flight Instructor Academy course, drive them to take the BEST courses, and then use this to develop that transition training syllabus. So that's where we're going with it, and those are the guides to initial pilot checkout.